It's hard to believe, even for the three of us who've recorded all these episodes, but here we are, Camp Code Podcast 100. Join us as we share the most memorable tips our listeners have found over the years and ones we've heard from each other. We'll give you a sneak peek at some of our amusing behind the scene moments, as well as our thoughts on how the industry has changed since we began recording over 8 years ago. Welcome to our celebration of 100 episodes of Camp Code.
Do you ever feel like you're spending so much time at the office that you have no time left for camp? With UltraCamp, you can track attendance, manage staff applications, and streamline registration so you'll be back outside in no time. Find out more at ultracampmanagement.com/campcode.
Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by Go Camp Pro. We have created and are dedicated to this podcast because we believe that staff training is one of, if not the most important part of your job as a camp director. Staff training is what prepares your staff to care for their campers, to feel confident in their skills, to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and to learn along the way. A well thought out and intentional staff training will help you in more ways than you can imagine, and we need to help each other bring our very best. Welcome, my friends. It is episode 100. So excited to be joined by these two other wonderful women, and we're going to do some introductions before we dive into our episode today. So Beth, will you start us off?
Absolutely. I'm Beth Allison. I'm co-owner of Camp Hacker and Go Camp Pro, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm a camp consultant and trainer coming to you today from freezing Woodstock, Ontario, Canada. And my passion is building solid, supportive, and purposeful community.
Thanks, Beth. And Gabrielle.
My name's Gabrielle. I'm one of the camp directors of Camp Waro. Camp Waro is an all-girls camp in the Laurentian Mountains of Quebec, Canada, and we focus on creating a positive environment for gender minorities, and my pronouns are she, her.
I'm Ruby Compton. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Chief Exploration Officer for Ruby Outdoors. I'm an organization that it's just me. I'm a solopreneur who supports camps and outdoor programs primarily in the Western North Carolina region, but also all over the world. And today we are so excited because this is episode number 100. And we thought today would be a great day to talk about, now that we are 100 episodes in, what have we learned so far? So we asked our listeners actually to share what were some things that they had heard or had gained from listening to Camp Code, to our podcast, to seeing us in presentations, just being a part of this community. And we got some really great answers back. So we want to talk a little bit about some of those. We're also going to give you all some behind the scenes highlights or funny moments. Yeah, how to describe them best, as well as share some of our lessons learned from one another. So I think I'm just going to jump in and share one of our first notes that came from my dear friend Gwen. And she shared always practical, factual, and boundary pushing in a good way. Beth's questions for staff to develop a sense of judgment about whether something is a good idea at camp, as opposed to always asking for permission without thinking deeply or with self-regulation about the idea. I learn so much each time I listen. Gwen, thanks so much for your comment. Beth, do you want to share any more, elaborate on that at all?
Well, I think she's referring to the 4S test, which we've talked about many times. It's a decision-making tool that my husband and I came up with to give our people boundaries and a way to make the best choices without us always having to be present. So that came out of a need after our first year where things were not where we wanted them to be. Let's just put it that way. So the 4S's are 4 questions. Is it safe? Does it build self-esteem? Does it serve the community? And does it demonstrate good stewardship of the environment? So all of our staff and our campers, our volunteers, everybody has to answer yes to all 4 questions before they can do an activity or sing a song or essentially speak. And if they can't answer yes to all 4 questions, they can't do the activity. They need to reframe things to make it more positive. And it is something that completely changed our camp culture. And it's created a place where people genuinely care for each other and that sense of community. They work really hard to protect it. So certainly something that worked really well for us. And I know of many camps who have stolen the idea with permission, of course.
I'm one of
So
those camps.
I'm happy to hear it's out in the world.
It's me.
Awesome. Fantastic. Beth, do you want to share another one with us?
Yes, I have a very short one from Emma Sulas, and she says what she learned was to train your staff to ask for consent for something as small as a high five.
I'm
And I think
celebrating over here.
a lot of that was sort of Ruby's thing. I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about that, Ruby, but you were really pushing us in a good way, thanks, Gwen, to be more thoughtful and intentional about our consent.
And I think what's interesting is I feel like we were talking about consent just before and as it became a part of the kind of national conversation when we talked about Me Too and Time's Up. And we do have a few episodes talking about how to address those kind of conversations at camp and how to operate in a world where sometimes people feel like, I can't say anything without upsetting someone or triggering somebody or whatever, and there just really is this big cultural shift to where consent is cool, and this idea of assuming that we know how people want to be treated. It's not the golden rule anymore of like treat others the way you want to be treated. It's the platinum rule of treat others the way they want to be treated, and to know that we have to ask and talk about it. So yay, Emma, thanks so much for writing in, and I'm looking forward to hearing more people's input on how consent language at your camp has changed the culture. Awesome. All right, I have another one. So this one says, my first month as a camp director was February 2020. I was excited and ready to go for an excellent first season. I hired a great team.
What a season to start.
And yeah, right. I hired a great team, and then almost immediately our first team meeting online. We hit the pandemic and I had to change everything. Started taking walks with Camp Code and just doing everything I could to soak up all the learning I could as a new director and a pandemic director. I honestly do not think I could have planned my online staff training in camp in 2020 or the in-person staff training and overnight and day camp in 2021 without Camp Code. Thanks. It was my training ground, my connection to others who were going through what I was going through, and my inspiration when I needed to know what works and what doesn't, and my comfort when I felt totally alone. And it continues to be a place of learning for me, of course, and something that I recommend to the emerging leaders at my camp all the time. Thank you.
Nice.
We love hearing that. Gabrielle, I'm curious, how does any of that strike for you? I know you've had a pretty major couple of years too, as we all have, but you've been, in it, in the thick of it.
Yeah, I mean, my heart goes out to this person, and I think it's funny because this year with my team, we're looking at camp, we're having opportunities to reimagine camp as well, and we keep stumbling upon these half started, half in the middle projects that we were working on in 2019 at the beginning of 2020, and it's almost like this pile of hopes and dreams that have collected dust. And I see so many camp directors in that position, and what a heartbreak to get so excited to start in your career. And of course, there must have been so many dreams and hopes, but I'm also rejoiced with our community of this come together spirit, this problem solving energy and support. And camp is tough, and I can see the resilience within our industry, and even more importantly, the support within our industry. And that just makes me feel so proud.
And I love how they said it was my training ground and my connection with others who are going through what I'm going through. That's exactly why we started this podcast in the first place. So yay, that's really cool. So many of us are alone during that school year, or we work with just one other person who's often not in that same geographical space. And it can be daunting and terrifying and lonely. So we're really glad to hear that our podcast helps people feel more connected to the camp community as a whole. and that we're offering a bit of inspiration and comfort. That's great.
Yeah.
I have another one from a
Mm.
longtime self-proclaimed self-proclaimed longtime listener. There we go. And they say, I love the show. It has quick transferable skills I can use and little things I can do that don't seem overwhelming. My favorite part is just listening and having content I can connect with from other professionals. Thank you to you and the team for your hard work and sharing your passion. I think it really is our passion. And it's a reminder that it's the little things that matter. So you don't need to leave any kind of professional training, be it in-person conferences, remember those? Or online webinars or books or podcasts with life-changing dramatic ideas. Sometimes it's just great to pick up a few transferable skills with each bit of learning and incorporate them into your training or your camp program. And those kinds of things can add up to amazing changes.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big things that I hope we will continue to offer, and I'm really proud that we have offered in the past, is real things you can plug in right now. And recognizing every camp is different, every program is different. So exactly how we describe it is not necessarily what you're going to do. But if it sparks an idea of like, oh, that's genius, and this is how it would work at my camp, that's when I get really excited. And I love hearing from folks saying, hey, we took this thing that you did and we did it this way.
Mhm.
And so know that anything we say on the podcast, largely you can put your own spin on it, like take it
Absolutely.
and create your own magic around it. And as much as possible, I hope that there are some plug and play tips that we are able to share, but also that there are cool ideas that come out of what is said. And these two ladies who've been on many calls with me know that often I will say something like, before I share an idea, like, I don't love this idea, but I'm going to share this because it might spark something really cool for you, and that kind of brainstorming atmosphere. Very cool. All right. While you were talking, I was looking up. Colleen was the one that I read my last letter from. So thanks, Colleen, for taking the time to share. And then next up is from John. And John said that, what have you gained from being a Camp Code listener? I think the greatest thing I've gained through listening is, as I am listening, just personally creating the space to really rethink how camp has been done and thinking strategically about how we are doing it here at Kadesh. The topics bring up personal thoughts, and I often find myself having Siri make notes for me while I drive. Anyways, thank you so much for all your great knowledge and insight, and pass on my thanks to the rest of the team. And John, I do that too. I'm like, Siri, make a note when I hear something good on a podcast. Beth, what does that letter bring up for
Well,
you?
I think what I love about that comment is where he says creating the space to really rethink how camp has been done. That's what we should be doing every year, all of the time.
Yeah.
Yes, we may love our training and our programs, but we always need to be in that open-minded headspace to ask ourselves, are we doing all we can? Do things need to be adapted to respond to changes in our world? Are we still growing and learning? All those kinds of questions, and being strategic about it. So important. Creating space to act and not react whenever possible is really key to developing your camp program.
What about you, What about for you, Gabrielle? Got my words all twisted there for a second. I got so excited.
I like Beth, I love the idea of us as professionals, camp professionals, creating the space throughout the year to think about how can we do camp better? How can we do it differently? And I think what also speaks to me is I love that I'm part of a community that is intentionally thinking about our staff. And when we do that, then our staff can intentionally think about our campers. And it just makes me feel like I'm part of a community that really cares about the people that we serve. And I know it's scary to change things, especially when you have experience, especially when you've done things that have worked. But in our industry, we need to constantly be evolving to support the generation that's going through the things that we've never gone through before. And the more we can learn from each other and the more we can create space to stop, pause, think, and adapt, the more we can be that support person. So I now also just learned a tip of giving notes to Siri. I usually call like now I'm like call a friend. I'm usually call one of my staff teammates and say like, hey, have we thought about this? And it's like, oh, Gab's driving. She wants me to jot down notes, but Siri sounds like a good idea too.
See, we learn from our listeners as
Sure.
well. Awesome. All right, Beth, I believe you have another one for us.
I have one more. This is our last one, I think. So thanks to everybody who took the time to send stuff in. We're really grateful. And this one I loved reading because I could hear my co-ladies all the way through this when I was reading. I was like, yep, that's Ruby, Gabby, yep, check. So I started my camp in 2019 and didn't run in 2020 for obvious reasons. So last year was a pivotal year for me and I came out feeling awesome, only to read the staff evals that came out lacking. Can you imagine? Oh, that's so depressing, but it's happened to us all. We focused a lot on how our intentional beginning broke apart across communication during the summer. This season, my ops manager and I went into it with fervor. Love that. More fervor. We completely rethought our staff training, and I'm excited that we just hired 18 of the most amazing female identifying individuals. A lot of it is thanks to the ideas that Camp Code gave me. So here are some of the ideas that I'm using. We changed our application to ask intentional questions related to our mission. Gabrielle, how many times have you said that? We changed our job descriptions to emphasize our mission as well, and this led to 400% more applicants than the previous year. We interviewed over 40 folks for 18 positions. Our folks we interview get a pre-interview packet that gives them lots of information from our top asked questions the previous year. So look at that. Analyzing, front loading, love it. We implemented an interview rubric. Ruby, that's definitely a Ruby thing.
I don't know why you would think that.
Which really helps us to decide between some fabulous folks. We're doing pre-training modules spanning the following months. Our staff handbook is long but interactive, and we combined it with a journal that staff can use all summer, matches our camper journals as well with prompts, so they have prompts to engage with their campers, along with team building Zoom calls and a book club. I mean, they are doing it all at this camp. Isn't that exciting?
Wow.
Our staff training is 3 weeks long. So jealous. But this year it is planned out with selfie time, as we call it, which is siesta moments that we didn't have last year. And we're including a lot about communication and mission in addition to our trip protocols. I feel like staff are already getting excited for the summer and getting kids outside. I think we're going to have an amazing summer. And she goes on to say, I am grateful for finding the whole slew of podcasts. That's an understatement, but I'm most grateful for the Camp Code staff taking the time to share on their podcasts. We are working on ACA accreditation this year, and I think we're going to fly through it. So what do you two ladies have to say about that?
I mean, I know Gabrielle asked, are we doing a recap today? And I was like, well, you know what? I think this letter does it. It basically recaps. Do all these things. You're doing it the Camp Code way. So
I just want a slow clap, like just stand there, slow clap.
Yep.
The way to apply the stuff that you're learning. I mean, I'm just bow down, slow clap. It's it's one thing to believe in it, want to do it, but then actually putting it into practice is a whole other thing. And well done.
And to come back from a year of excitement that got canceled.
Yep.
And then to think you did really well and to find out things had fallen apart and the staff didn't tell you.
Yeah.
And then to be this excited to do again is just like, I really compliment your perseverance and your grit and resilience and determination. That's so inspiring.
Awesome.
I love that.
Well, thank you all so much for tuning into this segment. Next up, we're going to be talking a bit more about some of what we've learned from each other, as well as some of our hilarious behind the scenes moments. But first, we got to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. We truly wouldn't have made it to 100 episodes this soon without the support of our podcast sponsor, Ultra Camp. Did you know you can visit their website and download a free guide titled 5 Unique Ways to Connect with Campers Outside of Camp? When you visit ultracampmanagement.com/campcode, you can download this free guide. You can also find out more about Ultra Camp's transparent and flexible pricing that lets you rest easy and focus on what is most important, your campers. Ultra Camp offers no long-term contracts. They have clear pricing with no hidden costs. They have low minimum entry and flexible payment terms. Ultra Camp's goal is to provide resources so that their clients can spend more time in camp doing what they do best. And if this doesn't sound like your registration software, don't you think it should? Visit their website, ultracampmanagement.com/campcode, and set up a time to chat. They look forward to meeting you. All right, friends, we are back. And before we dive into some more stories, just want to, you know me, I like the numbers, I like the data. So I want to share some stats that are kind of fun. Looked them up. I'm a nerd who likes numbers. And so here is some info for you. Since we started this podcast, a little over 8 years, that's what she said. We have released, obviously, 100 episodes that altogether offer over 60 hours of professional development focused on designing intentional staff training. I guess if you sat down and listened to all of our episodes, it would just about be like going to a conference all about staff training. More voices is better. So don't do that. But pick and choose and listen. I feel like if you sat down and binged us, it would be a lot. All right. And let's see, over 31,000 downloads over the last 2 years alone. What?
Wow.
We actually
wow.
changed our podcast hosting platform. So most of the rest of these stats are from the last couple of years. And so there may be more, but this is what we have captured for now. We have over 50 5-star ratings in podcasting apps. We'd love to make it to 100. Check out your podcasting app right now. Leave a rating review. Thanks. All right, great. Over 2,500 cities, towns, and municipalities across the world have logged downloads for the show. Yeah, pretty cool. And what's funny is I went through and I was like counting and I was like, oh, there's so many. I'm not going to count all of these. And later on, I saw there was a total at the top. But our top six cities overall, we can see it by episode, but overall, are Toronto, Columbus, Ohio, Montreal, Sheboygan, Wisconsin, Manhattan, and Chicago. So shout out to all our camp director friends who are listening all across the world. We have listeners on all 6 inhabited continents. And I don't know, we should run an experiment. If you go to Antarctica, throw us a download while you're down there. If you can get some internet,
amazing.
See if it pops up. I just would like to see that get filled in on the map. But we have downloads all across the world, listeners in 75 countries. And a couple of our most popular episodes recently, in case you are a new listener, engaging multi-generational staff in training. I think that's going to continue to be applicable. That's episode number 71. And then staff meetings can be staff training. Episode number 65. Both of those had over 1,000 downloads. So I wanted to throw a quick highlight to them as well.
So exciting. I remember Gab and I being in Russia and these women rushing up to us to tell us how much they loved Camp Code, and they were from Siberia. And it blew my mind that they had listened to all the episodes, and they were amazing.
They were amazing. And they were telling us all the wonderful things that they were doing at their camp. And then that blew our minds because it was like, come on the show. You're fantastic. Oh yeah, that was quite an experience.
Yeah, amazing.
That's awesome. And anytime, if we ever do have in-person conferences again, it is always really nice when people come up and say, hey, I liked this episode, or thanks for what you do. It always warms the heart a little bit, and I will happily chat with you for a few minutes when you say the magic words. All right. So next up on today's episode, we want to share a little bit about what we've learned from each other. And so we are going to start with Beth sharing about what have you learned from me?
So I came up with this idea for this part of our podcast, and this morning I was thoroughly annoyed with myself for giving myself such a difficult piece of homework, because like, how do I choose just one thing that I've learned from Ruby over all these years? It's
Yeah.
impossible. So I finally narrowed it down to one of my favorites. So years ago, we created a session all about giving feedback without your staff hating you. And we started it with Gab's PI acronym, Professional Information Exchange. And then Ruby created this amazing staff evaluation process that included a Venn diagram of 3 questions for staff to ponder in their evaluation. So the first one is, what are the needs of camp? The second one, what are the needs of the people in your care? And the third one, what are your needs? So for Ruby, she gives staff time to fill this out, reflect on what overlaps and what doesn't in the Venn diagram, and then ask staff some questions like, what did they do to meet the needs of each of those areas? What happened as a result of their actions? And therefore, of course, what's their impact? It's such a great reflection tool. And the final step is to ask them about their growth factors under specific headings. So in other words, how did they manage this growth? How did they learn these skills? And for this, she created a superb acronym, which brings a tear to my eye because I'm so very proud. And the first is intention setting. The second is making mistakes. The third is practicing. The fourth is asking questions. The fifth is collecting from others. And the sixth is trying something new. And if you could see these written out, you would notice that the acronym is IMPACT. Such a great reflection tool for staff, helping them to become more comfortable with evaluations to see how it can help them in positive ways and to get them excited about how they can continue to grow and develop. So well done, Ruby. I will always use that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that person sounds kind of smart. That's cool. Awesome. All right. Next up, Gabrielle, can you share a little bit about what you have learned from Beth?
Absolutely. And I echo Beth, your suggestion. I was like, I love this idea. And then I was like, I don't love this idea.
It's hard, isn't it?
I need multiple podcasts to speak about both of you.
Yes.
I would like to start with, from Beth, what I've learned is lead with a big heart and a strong line. And so for me, what that means is that you genuinely care about your staff members and you genuinely care about their success and their happiness. But there's a strong line that we have within our community to protect our community. And being transparent is kind to your staff members. And one of my favorite sentences from Beth is, let me make myself perfectly clear, and letting staff members know what is expected from them and what would be the consequences if we cross that line. And I think why Beth and Travis have such a family, extended family within the camp community that work within camping or leadership with young individuals is because that they truly care about the people that they lead, but they also protect that community as well. And even if you're not part of that community anymore, there's still a place for you at the table. So I try to remember that when I'm leading. Big heart, strong line.
I think that's a sticker you need to make me.
I got it. I'm on it.
Done. Amazing. All right. Well, I get the joy and pleasure of sharing a couple of the best lessons I've learned from Gabrielle. And the one of the biggest ones that has really changed my teaching is the importance of multimodal training, which is a big fancy word that I don't think Gabs would necessarily use, but it's basically like, I can't just teach the way that I was taught. And so like,
Yes.
I'm a reader. If I put out a staff manual, I expect everybody's going to have read it, because I like to read the staff manual, and that is not going to work for all learners. And so Gabs has really pushed me to make sure that when I'm teaching, that there are visuals, that there's imagery, that there's not too many words. And that sort of like editing and thinking about my presentation style has definitely raised the bar on my teaching. And it goes from doing staff trainings to like even teaching like CPR first aid and lifeguarding, things like that. I just across the board, that has really helped. And I also just want to throw another like quick shout out to, I was 100% that person who would receive an application, and if there was a resume with a spelling error on it, I would throw it out. I was like, well, this person wasn't careful, and and 1,000%, I was that person. And because I was like, I don't have time, they have a spelling error, they weeded themselves out. And now I see that that is not a legitimate reason to throw out an application, and that there is a lot of value in making sure that we are paying attention to the various learning styles and learning differences that are out there. And if you're not familiar with what any of those are, ask your community. I bet there are folks who have various learning differences and would appreciate being able to tell you how they could learn best. So asking that question, how do you learn best? What do you need to be successful here? I've learned a lot by asking that alongside Gabs.
Yeah, because we miss out on a lot of great people when we assume they should all be like us.
Yeah.
Yep.
Beth, you've thrown out some applications because of spelling errors too, haven't you?
Yep. And written in pencil. Yep.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago, but yes, I did.
Changing the world, Gabs. Changing the world.
That's right.
When I was on the online dating scene, and I would be texting people at the very beginning, I would copy paste my text because the theirs get me so confused. And I know that if you use their incorrectly, that is a trigger for some people. So I would copy paste it to my friend Zoe, and I'd be like, can you check my spelling? And then I would copy paste. And she was like, I'm only getting half of this conversation. Can you just like involve me? Is there a way that the three of us can be involved? I was like, no, but so she was like my editor for when I was trying to be aloof and like, like, oh, sure, whatever, no big deal. But like deep down, I was like getting everything.
I did not know that. That's a fantastic story. Awesome. All right, we'll go around one more time. And Beth, tell us what you learned from Gabs.
So again, one of the hardest exercises I've ever had to do. How do I choose my favorite from everything Gab has taught us? So much brilliance has come out of that woman. But as you know, I do love me a great acronym, and this is one of WARO's. So the other passion that I have, as much as I love to develop brand new staff, I really put a lot of energy into my return staff when I was directing, because I often felt that they sometimes got neglected. Once we had them in the door the first year, we didn't need to teach them anymore. Not true. So this is WARO's guideline for their return staff for developing that desired behavior that they're looking for when they're role modeling to new staff. So Gab's acronym is WARP, and the W stands for welcome. So things like every time a return staff member sees someone else walking down the path, they go up and greet them. When the new staff enters the room, the return staff acknowledge them. If somebody's moving bags, they're offering to help. And this is what I love about this particular piece is return staff, because of Gabs, understand that they are the hosts during training and they need to be as welcoming as possible. So they get together ahead of time before the new staff really get a chance to arrive, and they come up with ways to welcome them in very specific situations during training. And for WARO, this is my favorite, a welcome shouldn't be noticed, it should just be felt. O is for observe. A lot of returning staff members, as we know, are good at observing behaviors in campers because, I mean, it's one of the reasons we hire them back. So they need to apply that knowledge into staff training. So for example, if they enter the staff lounge and there are groups of first years that are all sort of huddled together and they need to be a bit infiltrated, the return staff try to get them to mingle with new people. Is one person off to the side grabbing a quiet moment for herself, or is she looking overwhelmed and sad? And so they check in and try to figure out if she's okay, if she's not okay. And if she's not, then one of them goes to Gab and lets her know. But these are skills that they've already developed with campers. So they use them to help that staff dynamic. Role model, a lot of returning staff members are skilled at many things that we do during training. They've honed those skills over the years and they don't need to go through all those basics of a new staff person. But that brand new staff person needs to see somebody role model how they should behave to be successful during training. And as Gab likes to tell the story, she has staff members who can wake up 2 minutes before flag on the very first morning together and be dressed and on time and have absolutely everything they need. But she has them get up early anyway so that they can help new staff be prepared for the day. And all of her return staff take notes during sessions, even if they could teach that material. because they are role modeling. And P, of course, is for problem solving. Of course, our return staff knows the info. They know how to take care of that camper who's missing home or is having a meltdown or who is bored. But we want them to help problem solve these situations with our new staff. And so Gab encourages her veteran staff to ask questions like, what do you think? What would you try? Because she knows that it helps staff members build confidence. And as we all know, there is growth and information retention when they are helping other people out. So warp, brilliant, use it all the time.
Genius.
Mhm.
And a creative spelling as well.
Yes.
So-
Is it?
It's great. It's great.
Great.
So good.
Wonderful.
It's so good. You know, if you see it written out somewhere, you can be like, trademark that because you know it's your spelling. So
Good
all to
point.
go.
And that is why this is how used to my staff are to me, where they're just like, we get what she's saying. It's
Yeah.
fine. And they move forward. So until today, I've probably been teaching warp for maybe 8 or maybe 10 years. Nobody has ever told me that that's not how warp is spelled.
It's all
That's what we're
right.
here for you. Yeah.
I love
more
it.
a warp. It's
It's more a warp. Yes, it is.
Awesome. Well, Gabs, we're coming to you next. What have you learned from me?
Mind the gap, mind the gap, mind the gap. So if you've traveled to Europe or England, there's signs everywhere, especially when you're hopping onto a metro or subway and it says mind the gap. So there's obviously a gap and you have to mind that. Personally, I'm somebody that loves big ideas and inspiring people with those big ideas. And Ruby has taught me the value and the importance of minding the gap between our big ideas and the details of executing those ideas. And often when Beth and myself and Ruby are creating sessions or creating content, Ruby's the person that comes in and says, how are we making sure that these details are they're being followed through? If you leave an organization, Ruby has created a map for that organization to be followed. And mind the gap for me also means who's missing, who's not at the table, what gap are we missing when we're serving this community? And it has really pushed me to, okay, I'm taking productivity classes, which is ridiculous. I don't even know who I am anymore. But I am wanting to be that leader that minds the gap. I'm good at the other stuff. But I do know that if we take care of these details, we can be so much more intentional, that the organization isn't just dependent on me or the person that's in charge, that anybody can step in and not be lost. But more importantly, it's more inclusive. So the details matter, and putting that time and energy, even though you might not feel like doing it, is a care for your organization and your people.
Yep, for
Right on.
sure.
Thanks, Gabs. Okay, now it is my turn to talk about what I've learned from Beth. And one of the biggest things that I've learned from Beth, which is probably not going to be shocking to you all, is to get it done early. So she is always the one who, when we have a presentation or something coming up, that she's like, hey, we should start working on this. And instead of waiting till the last minute to do it. And it's always a better product because of that, because it gives us more think time and revision time and a chance for Gabrielle to go, none of this makes sense. And then we start over again. And it happens every time. And it's great because in the end, it always ends up being this much just more refined product. So I'm just so grateful for that reminder. And I also have to give the biggest shout out in the world to Beth. And I have been fortunate that I got to learn from Beth and then go visit a camp that she had run for a long time. And so getting to hear all these things that she did and then get to see how it played out, even though she wasn't there anymore, like pulling strings. It was so cool. And the biggest thing was driving into camp and the staff coming up to Travis and Beth and saying, welcome home. And saying to me, welcome and welcome home. And I just remember being completely floored by the feeling that gave me, being new person to that camp, being a visitor to that country, just all sorts of things where I felt very out of place, and being welcomed with complete and utter and open arms. And I remember just being like, this is the feeling that camp should have to every single person that is coming here, and set a new goal for me for how I wanted camp to feel to folks who came on camp property. So that's kind of a big deal.
Thanks, Ruby.
Yeah,
And you're an honorary Canadian now, so
You sure are.
These are my support Canadians. You all get to hear my conversations with my support Canadians every couple of weeks. Awesome. Well, next up, we wanted to share a few of our hilarious behind the scenes moments. And just things that happened that ended up on the editing room floor, that we have to give a big shout out to our podcast editor Etienne, who makes us sound great, and today we've given him all the edits. So let's start with Beth. What's a behind the scenes moment you want to share today?
Well, I don't really want to share it, but in our very first podcast, I talked about the 4 S's. And we were just minutes into the recording, and I was listing them off so that I could explain their value. And I actually could not remember the 4th S, no matter how hard I tried. And Gab and Ruby were just howling, and that was not helping me to remember. And I mean, this was something I created, and I'd been using it for years. I talked about it dozens of times at conferences, and I just could not remember. I think it was stewardship. And it was very embarrassing, and we paused and started again, and I figured out what it was. But that was sort of my intro into podcasting, was not even remembering something my own brain created.
That's all right. It happens.
I still remember.
Gabs, I think you have one that happened kind of recently, yeah?
Yeah, recently I was doing our recap, as I usually do. And one of my cats, so I have 2 cats, Jack and Lily, and Jack is very vocal when his tummy's not happy, and he comes and he tells me something's not going right, and it's usually followed by puking. And that's exactly what happened while I was doing my recap. But I don't know why I sort of froze in the moment. So he literally puked on part of my leg and my chair, and I was doing the recap, and I know that we can pause, and I know that we can, but for some reason I was in it, and I was like, I just hope nobody's here can hear this. And I just powered through. And then afterwards I was like, I'm so sorry, I was off. My cat puked. And Ruby was like, why didn't you just stop? And I was like, I don't know. I was in the moment. I didn't know what to, it's done. Like, that's it. So,
being the professional that you are, we didn't notice. Like Ruby and I didn't catch that there was something going on at all. So
it's horrible.
Poor Jack.
Yeah, and then he was like, I feel better. Thanks. Bye.
Gotta love them pets.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, my behind the scenes moment is that every time I host and I have to read the intro, there is a risk that I will get the giggles and not be able to get through the intro. I feel like the couple of times we've had Travis on the podcast, it more often than not happens when he's here. But I don't know what it is. It's like every outtake you've ever seen of a TV show or a movie where somebody just can't get through their line. It happens, and just giggles, and Gab's about to like, like, I mean, they're very kind, but it gets to a point when I'm like, somebody else is gonna have to do this. And anytime you've listened to the intro, if it sounds like I'm smiling, I'm probably holding back the giggles. I don't know why.
Well, once it was almost, I don't think I'm exaggerating. I think once it was like close to 15 minutes. Like we all got it at one point.
Yeah.
And then had to sort of wipe our faces if we had mascara on. Like it was, and I don't know what happens with you, Ruby, but it just starts and then it's contagious. But there's one time where it was a straight up 15 minutes. Then we all got it. We all caught it.
One of my friends once told me that they observed in my giggle fits that often in my giggle fits, I will get to a point where I'm like, and then I go, and then I instantly start giggling again. And the So now I'm aware of that, which makes me laugh even harder. Anyway, it's a vicious cycle, but there are worse things, I guess.
Lots of fun times in 100 episodes.
Oh yeah.
All right. Anything else to highlight over our last 100 episodes before we move on?
I don't know. We'll have to save that for the 200th episode.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Great.
Here's to 100 more. Great.
I think
Well, oh, go
I
ahead.
think I think that what's also interesting for me that we're at our 100th. I remember one of our first conversations before we even had a camp code name, that I think we were saying like maybe we could get 2 seasons out of this topic. I think like that I recall somebody saying that and just saying where can we take it, but I also remember had like a little bit of anxiety that we're not going to be able to even make it past 1 season. And here we are, and now I'm at a point where I'm like, oh my gosh, we have so much more to talk about. Like we have to dedicate time to this is, and we do, but it's like we need more time to talk about things. There's so much more to talk about,
which is an excellent segue.
Indeed it is. So my friends, thank you all for listening, and we would love for you to get involved with the podcast. You can tell us your thoughts on this episode, your lessons learned, or hilarious behind the scenes moments that you want to know more about. You can tell us and ask us about those using the hashtag #CampCode. Tell us what topics you'd like for us to discuss, any guests that you recommend we have on the show, any great leadership training tips you have to share. We'd love to hear from you. We are all about sharing in this industry. And if you have found this podcast to be useful, please leave us a rating and review in your podcasting app of choice. Your feedback helps keep the show going and also helps more listeners find the podcast when they need it most. So please leave that rating when you get a chance. We'd love for you to get in touch with us if you have specific questions to follow up with. Beth, how can folks reach you?
You can find me at gocamp.pro, email me directly at beth@gocamp.pro, or I'm on Twitter at Topaz.
Gabz?
You can follow me on Instagram at Gabrielle Rail. Rail takes 2 L's. And you can reach out to me at info@waro.com. Waro is spelled OUAREAU.com.
And you can find me at Ruby Outdoors on Instagram, ruby@rubyoutdoors.com on email, or at rubylyn85 on Twitter. For our next podcast, we're going to be continuing the conversation we started in episode 99 about boundaries and how those apply at camp when we're building community norms. So boundaries part 2 on episode 101. So I hope you'll join us for that. Before we wrap up today's episode, we want to touch briefly on what we each think and upon reflecting on how has the camp industry and or staff training changed since we began podcasting 8 years ago. Beth, how do you see changes that have happened?
I think, like many things in our world, what was accepted for it's always been like this is no longer okay with people. And this is good. We are now starting to see pushback from staff about all kinds of things, how much we pay them, what's acceptable for hours off and breaks. And this goes for year-round staff too. We're seeing a lot more directors question what is appropriate financial compensation, as well as expectations their bosses or boards have of them and their time. There has even been talk of unionizing camp directors for this very reason. I think the way staff learn and how we teach them has changed significantly. They need many more bite-sized pieces rather than 2-hour-long sessions on topics, a lot more visuals, more time to practice and feeling comfortable with new skills. Now, I mean, let me be clear, we should have been doing this all along, but we're now learning how important it actually is to get folks on board with our mission and feeling excited and inspired and supported to work at camp. There are so many more changes, but I think I just want to end with how we need to support staff has changed dramatically in the last decade. They're more hesitant to try new things or make mistakes. They're almost petrified to fail. So inaction is what we're seeing. And I think that not only being aware of these differences in people is important, but also really taking that time to consider how we will revamp our trainings or our programs, our hiring practices to reflect the needs of people today, being intentional can only serve us and our people better.
Awesome. Gabrielle, what are your thoughts on this?
Everything that Beth is saying, I'm saying yes to. This is stuff that we should have been doing before, and I think now camp directors are doing it now. I think the little piece that I'd like to add to is basically including our staff in training, including our staff in the process of educating each other, allowing your staff members to educate you. I'm seeing a nice shift in that as well. And the truth is that I think for a long time it has been the camp directors that are the experts. I think that's an expectation from boards. I think that's an expectation from executive directors. And I think for camps to be successful today, we need to, we are on the path of realizing that our camp directors can't be the experts of everything, and that they need to involve their staff more on the conversation and use them to inform our camp culture.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I think one thing I want to point out is that the amount of change that's happened, there's been a disproportionate amount of change that's happened in the last 2 years than happened in the 6 prior. So even like if you were like 2019, top of my game, I know what I'm doing, you're running a very different camp in 2022 or going forward. And even if your camp is the same, you're operating in a different world. And I think that that's just like recognizing that, and that times of extreme change are stressful and challenging, and that's something we're all living through right now. I think the tolerance and understanding of online learning, as much as people are like, ugh, I'm sick of online learning, I don't want to go to another Zoom call. I think part of what's cool is that we know that camp directors and camp professionals can do teaching better than other places, and not even specifically, like, not necessarily schools, but there's other classes that folks take that you're just like, oh, this is kind of a pain to have to sit through, and we can deliver that same topic at camp and do it well and more effectively and more impactfully. And I think we can do that too with online learning, where even if people are like, I don't really want to do any online learning anymore because I'm tired of it, I actually think that online community space is something that previously, like, you could get away with not doing. I don't think you actually can not do it going forward. And that may look like, online interest sessions, online parent meetings, online meet and greets, some sort of staff training module, either synchronous or asynchronous. Like, I'm not saying you have to go all in on it, but I do think camps that just don't do it at all are going to be seen as being behind the times. So I think if it's something that you've resisted, think about, is there some sort of online training component that you can include? And I actually think that that's a smart move going forward, in a way that I'm not sure I would have recommended 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right. Very good. So now on to our final segment today. And our final segment on each podcast is a best practice for leadership training. We'd love to hear some of your most memorable moments or most effective tips. You can tell us what they are using that hashtag camp code. And this week's best practice is from Beth.
So I get to share another piece of genius from the mind of Gabrielle. When we've been talking to other directors and listening to their stories of difficulties in dealing with young adults who don't seem to see the world as their bosses do, Gabz came up with a way to frame this younger generation of staff that always helps me when I'm struggling to understand a young staff member who can honestly be 40 years my junior. Oh, it's painful to say. Obviously, we haven't had the same life experiences. Our world growing up was very different from theirs. And I can be sometimes frustrated to try to figure out how to communicate and to see their point of view. And Gabz has named them the WTF generation. They are a generation who wants to make an impact, but they also need support. So in the WTF generation, the F stands for what to fight, what to fund, what to follow, and what to fear. And if I ask myself these questions, it helps me figure out how to better teach a session, run a program, deliver a message on social media, how that messaging should look and what it should be, how I can help them to discover their own answers to these questions. WTF generation, what to fight, fund, follow, or fear. Thanks, Gab.
Genius. Awesome. Well, Camp Code is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Check out all our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. There are some amazing people with some sage advice, so look them up and give them a listen. And another thank you to Beth and Gabz for sharing today and for taking some time and all the 60 plus hours up to this point that we've shared with the camp industry. Thank you. It's so amazing. I also just want to take a moment to highlight another Go Camp Pro podcast. I really love the conversations that Rachel and Cassie are having over at the Beyond Camp podcast. On episode 32, they discuss the intersection of camp and social work with Kevin Amaralt. And every episode of the Beyond Camp podcast features a depth and authenticity of conversation that is unlike any of the other shows in the Go Camp Pro network. I hope you'll take a look at their feed and pick out an episode that calls to you. And again, a big shout out, episode 100, to Etienne, our editor. So sorry for all the work this week. But from all of us here at Camp Code, thanks for the listening, friends.